Hello again, everyone. This is Jamie Smith, and I'm a Title Plus consultant with Law Pro. We're bringing you another episode of the In Closing podcast, where I'll be discussing topics important to the real estate community. So, if you are a real estate agent, broker, lawyer, lender, investor, home buyer, or anything in between, we hope to provide some insightful content for you. Our guest for this episode is Cheng of George Street Law Group, and we sat down with Lee at his satellite office in Burlington, Ontario, to discuss the changes in the current real estate market and how his practice has adapted. Lee was called to the bar in 2013, and he's a commercial and residential real estate lawyer with a specialty in land development. In 2019, he was named one of Hamilton's top 40 under 40, and he's a current trustee of the Hamilton Law Association, a group whose events we frequently sponsor. So take another trip down with us, and let's enjoy another episode of the In Closing podcast. Thank you for joining us. Here we are at Cheng's satellite office with George Street Law Group, and we're about to have a little chat. Let's go. All right, and here we are again for our second episode of the In Closing podcast. This time out, we have Cheng of George Street Law Group, and we are so happy to have you. We're going to be talking about the real estate market and its effects on lawyers and their clients at the current time. And yeah, we're just happy to have you, man. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Jamie. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, I mean, we've known each other for, I'm going to say at least 5 years now, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
And so it's been great seeing you grow, but if you could just kind of tell the listeners and the folks watching a little bit about your journey.
My journey has always been kind of unconventional because I didn't come from a family of lawyers. I don't have a lot of lawyers around me growing up. So, I was always interested in building things, right? Like, building, whether it's, back when it's Lego, but now transitioning to, building buildings and communities and things like that. So I dabbled in architecture and urban planning in undergrad. And then, halfway through, I decided to make a pivot to policy, law and policy, but, still surrounding the same topic, right? So, and that's exactly what I ended up doing. Coming out of law school, I do, real estate, but also land development and things like that. So I've always been pretty fortunate to be able to stay in the path that I kind of set for myself. But, here we are, what is this, 8-10 years later, still doing the same thing. So, I haven't had a lot of changes to my career path aside from that pivot,
right?
And within law, I never had to go and start dabbling in family law or something like that,
right?
So that's always been my fortunate kind of footsteps. But getting to this point, though, you start to see, as you said, the ups and downs of everything, right?
Yeah.
For the longest time, real estate lawyers, if you started practicing after the late 80s, early 90s, you knew nothing but up. All
right.
The residential transactions have been sort of dumbed down to, hey, slapping on a title insurance policy and just let it run. Anyone will take anything at any given moment. Like, your buyer clients are never picky, but now we're seeing that full circle.
Right.
And it's interesting. It's very interesting to see what's happening live on the ground right now.
Yeah, and it's actually it's nice because I find so many people, they go to school with this mentality or an idea of what they want to do, and they come to a point where they need to not necessarily completely change what their interest is, but kind of like what you said, just a little pivot to hone in on, I guess, your interests and your outlook going forward, and maybe change of interest as well. So it's nice that you kind of, you had the architecture piece, like you said, Lego and developing things that way, but then you're like, let me flip it over here, and you're still applying the same interest, but maybe your skills have developed, and now it's kind of honed in on a more of a concise and I guess an area that you really see transcending in the future, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So of course, given the market is obviously crazy right now. Folks are anxious. Interest rates are rising, and they're talking about further hikes and inflation and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you can turn on the news and pretty much scare yourself one way or another with 10 different things, right? But in what ways kind of have you seen those effects have on consumers and your clients, and what have they needed to do essentially to make their dreams of owning a home or investing in a property a reality, versus where we are now compared to where it was even 6 months, a year ago?
Yeah, certainly I think the predominant kind of vibe we're getting is nobody's happy anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think back to, when things were all up and, going up and up, everyone's just happy to be dealing with an agreement of purchase and sale at all. Because otherwise you have no house and nothing. So, back then you're dealing with clients and you're playing the bad cop all the time, saying, hey, there are all these issues, and then here's how you deal with them, but nobody wants to deal with it. Just say, no, we want to close. The goal is to get the property. Now it's completely different, right? No one's happy. Every little small issue becomes a big issue, whether it's something that you can help with or something you can't help with, right? For example, general small chips and dings, or small damages that are physical in nature and that have nothing to do with title.
Right.
There's really not much the lawyers can do aside from, even if there is a representation and warranty baked into the agreement, there's really not much you can do in terms of holding up a closing. But we are treated like some magical version of the real estate agent where we could just
fix any problem
on our end alone, dictate all these terms.
Yes.
So that translates to unhappy clients.
Yes.
Right.
And you're bearing the brunt of them being unhappy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because for whatever reason, a lot of people along the way, along their journey, kind of throw everything back to the lawyers at the end and say, don't worry, your lawyer can take care of that. Don't worry, your lawyer can take care of that. When in reality, we're really constrained to what kind of deal you brought to us. Even then, right, there's the whole concept of if it's not something that is fundamental to the transaction or root to the title problem, we can't just unilaterally decide not to close.
Right.
We have to kick it back and say, you got to close and deal with it in small claims or something like that, which is generally not not desirable to the client, but
definitely not.
If we can deliver everything that they desired, we're not lawyers anymore.
Exactly.
Right? So that's always the problem that we're kind of wrestling with. So at this point in juncture, it's even if it's we're talking about a buyer's market, the prices have not come down in the real sense, because if you compare, for example, the price level of homes going on the market now and what the price level they're selling at, and you extrapolate that and compare it with the home prices back in the past where you had comparable interest rates.
Yes. Okay.
At a real level, they have still more than doubled or increasing. So the real price or real cost to real estate is still rising, and that kind of shifts all these different strategies in terms of like, private loans or people kind of bunching together, grouping together and buying a home, friends, maybe not even families, but we've seen that. We've seen that in the past in various different jurisdictions like GTA, Brampton, where the traditional cost of real estate has always been high. So you have these bigger extended families pulling together resources to buy a single home,
yes,
right? Versus one single family kind of just sticking with their own homes. So we haven't traditionally seen that in the Greater Hamilton, or even Niagara region, but we are starting to see it now more so in. We're kind of leapfrogging Hamilton altogether in the Niagara region. We're seeing a bunch of GTA, West GTA, Brampton,
head out there,
all buy properties in South Niagara. So that we're starting to see that more, but those will always be present in a situation where the real cost of real estate is always going up.
And
It
now,
doesn't matter what the current fluctuations are.
and now the folks who are shifting and looking out in Niagara region, for example, are they more like investor based? Like, are they doing it as an investment specifically, or is this, you know, folks who are looking for, you know, their home? And even if they are getting assistance from extended family members, right? Is it with the aim that, you know, one member of that family is going to be stationed in that property?
Yeah, it's actually quite a large like the whole investors purchasing real estate is actually, I feel like, blown out of proportion, because a lot of what we deal with are still owner occupied properties.
Okay.
Right. Yes, we do deal with a huge, not massive, but I would say a sizable percentage of the deals that are investor related. But by and large, these homes are owner occupied. So
Yeah, okay.
it begs the question: what will happen once things kind of settle down? With I hear a lot of calls about going back to the workplace, and leaderships, workplace leaderships demanding for people to return to the workplace. When that happens, I don't know what's going to happen to all these people who have moved very far away from where they actually work. I just got back from a vacation in Nova Scotia, and that's a province that has, recently during the pandemic enjoyed a lot of inflow of population. All of the children who left the province were like going back and staying in Nova Scotia now, buying real estate. What happens then when they're called back to the office?
Yes.
So I don't know what's going to happen,
Right.
But just logically, there will be some sort of dynamic that's kind of shifting at that point.
Yeah,
right?
because the remote working is going to be kind of slowed down, and a lot of, especially if the company isn't adapting or implementing a continued, remote structure going forward, right?
So we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. If everyone's going to get called back to the office, are they still going to be okay with that 2-hour, 3-hour commute?
Yeah,
one way to Toronto or Mississauga, right? Yeah. So I don't think it's sustainable on a personal level, but the cost of living is always something that will force people to do certain things.
Right.
It's not unheard of for local Niagara residents to commute all the way to Oshawa once the plant moved from St. Catharines.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And they kept doing that for years. So maybe nothing will happen. Right. So it's always interesting to kind of see these kind of things happening now and kind of keep tabs on them and see what happens in the future.
And then, so now just getting back to, I guess, the stuff you were saying with, the consumers being more, I guess, cognizant or more concerned with kind of small items that aren't necessarily something that you can deal with. So with these things, are you seeing the return of more conditions, like that being part of the APS now, more conditions coming back? And is that effectively causing a lot of these deals to be delayed, or just more stress around completing the transaction for these sort of items?
Yeah, stress is all, like through the roof.
Yeah.
Because there's always last minute kind of disputes. Last minute requirement for us to sort of manage client expectation. Yeah. That's really most of what we do here. Is
and previously it probably kind of like wasn't like that, I guess.
No,
right?
Previously you would tell them, hey, this is what's happening, and they would say, oh, there's XYZ is an issue, and I will say, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to hold up the closing? Because I can't do that, first of all. And secondly, what do you, if the seller doesn't agree, they're very happy to just no, just I'll deal with it. Right. Now it's like, oh, why can't they agree to that? Well, it's not in your agreement to, and even if it is in the agreement, it's not a real title problem, or it's not a fundamental issue to the transaction.
Right.
Then we can't unilaterally close, and we have to get the buy-in from the other side. And if they don't, you can only close under protest. There's only one solution to that.
Gotcha. So they would have to go back to their realtor and get the realtors to kind of sort that out together. So not too many lawyers, especially ones who've been called to the bar recently, have dealt with a downturn like this, right? I was reading something that said realtors up in like Northern Ontario, they've seen an influx of people becoming realtors because that was during the hot market, and then they've actually underestimated how things are kind of drying up a little bit, and so a lot of them are actually returning to previous jobs and until kind of things heat up. So I was wondering if there are ways that you've had to adapt your practice to these market conditions, and if you anticipate anything in 2023 changing as well, and maybe how you're planning on adjusting at those times.
So there's a lot of talks at all times, and even when I first started talking to the older lawyers, they're always talking about, oh, you got to prepare for the downturn, you got to prepare for the downturn, especially lawyers in Hamilton, because we've had, I believe it was like a decade or so, or a decade or two of just very subdued market. There's not much happening. It's not really going up and it's not going down. There's just very little things happening.
Sure.
If there's nothing happening, then there's no transactions for the lawyers to deal with.
Yeah.
So there was always these talks about diversification, right? Okay, so you can't just do real estate. You have to do like other things to kind of like complement or whatever, diversify and deal with, get other types of work. At the very essence of it, right? But I after I kind of got really deep into real estate, I realized it's really tough to diversify. For example, I don't have the capacity. Maybe somebody else does. I just simply don't have the mental capacity to really get into, let's say, for example, bankruptcy and solvency law.
Sure. Okay.
That's a whole other section of the library that you have to just basically look through all the books on, right?
Yeah.
So my thing is, diversification can still happen within the same industry.
Sure.
And that's what I'm doing personally.
Gotcha.
Right? I am diversifying my practice more, or, putting more emphasis or marketing dollars or personal energy and time into expanding or, trying to look for more pipelines in, for example, secured lending, for, construction lien work or, land development work, right?
Sure.
So those are always ways for you to diversify within your practice area, not necessarily where, when you talk to other lawyers, they're like, oh yeah, we now have like an insolvency group. Well, we don't have that kind of resource to all of a sudden hire a bunch of people to jumpstart an insolvency group,
sure.
Right?
And
so
that takes an investment in itself.
Exactly.
As well,
So for someone, you mentioned someone new, someone just starting out, or someone may not be a part of a bigger group or more full service firm, it's hard for someone to in the small to mid tier market to say, okay, why don't you just do an insolvency group to diversify, right? But it is possible for you to diversify within this larger umbrella of real estate.
Yeah.
Something's always happening. So for example, as a good example is industrial properties were really hot when everything else was slowing down, right? And they are still hot.
Yeah.
Commercial real estate is very hot right now.
Okay.
In the land development market, the mid-sized to larger players are bargain hunting right now.
Right.
So I think what's happening is a lot of the inventory are freeing up because the smaller guys can no longer service the debt because of the rates are going up. But those guys, the bigger guys, have seen, they're routinely dealing with 8 to 10 to 12% interest. So there's no sticker shock.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
A 3% increase on what used to be a 10% deal, you're not dealing with a multiplier, you're dealing with a percentage increase.
Sure.
Right? Whereas in the residential space, you're used to now all of a sudden 2% interest, 1% interest. It's going up by multiplies.
Right.
Right. So when you're doing that, it's the sticker shock is not as good, it's not as big, and it doesn't shy away from the deal. You're getting more aggressive negotiations, yes.
Yeah.
Right? You're sometimes shaving tens of millions of dollars off of the original value.
Wow.
But things are still happening.
Okay.
So that's how I'm diversifying, and that's how really what I think is the safer way for someone to sort of diversify and kind of deal with the market instead of jumping into a whole other practice area altogether. Because practice of law is a weighing game of risks.
Sure.
Right. I don't know about other practice areas, but in real estate, your individual deal in terms of your risk exposure versus how much return you're getting on that deal is frankly terrible.
Okay.
You can never justify, if it's just a one-off thing, you can never justify charging, the rates we charge and be exposed to such large dollar amounts potential risk, right? So you have to have a sophisticated system to deal with these things at a volume basis.
Right.
Right. And if you don't know what you're doing, then it's impossible for you to set up that system.
Sure.
And if that system is not there, then it's not a profitable business. So
Right.
that's frankly what it is.
So yeah, so in terms of, for new real estate lawyers, if they, I guess if they're feeling their own anxiety of saying, okay, hey, well, I want to diversify in this, but I've never really dabbled in it, and I don't have maybe resources to invest my time as well as my money into really studying this side of the game. Like, would you recommend that they either find mentors or other lawyers who are in that space that they can maybe contact and learn some stuff from, or team up in that way? Have you seen that at all?
I haven't seen it personally, but it's always something that you can do as a newer lawyer. You have to have some, sphere of support.
Yeah.
You can't just go at everything alone.
Right.
Right. Like even in real estate, I constantly have a circle of trusted friends and colleagues that I could sort of call and bounce ideas off of, or just frankly, discuss,
Yeah.
right? Just whatever it may be. So in any practice area, you have to have that in order to be successful,
Right.
In order to not get sued,
Yeah.
and in order to basically set something up so that you can actually be, viable as a business. So, one of the things that for someone new coming in is I would highly advise against competing on pricing.
Okay,
just
go
talked
on
about
that
it.
a bit. Yeah, go
Yeah.
on that a little bit. Yeah.
We just talked about how it's not, it's frankly a terrible business model if you're just doing these things as they come. You're not making enough money on these individual deals. Your exposure to real estate, everything is high dollar value, right? Because of the market, the way the market has gone. So everything's high dollar value. Your exposure is directly tied to the value of the transaction.
Okay.
Your billing is frankly very small. Legal fees are typically the smallest piece of the puzzle, right, in terms of the closing costs. So your revenue doesn't actually match the level of risks. So you have to basically price yourself appropriately,
Yeah.
right, instead of going down the rabbit hole of competing on pricing, because then you have to bring in more work to make a living. But if you bring in more work, you don't have the time to actually sit down and think and actually learn the trade. Like really take the time to learn the trade and set up that system. Because otherwise you're not going to be profitable. It's not going to. You have to look at it as a business at all times, even though it's a professional practice.
Right.
If you don't have the knowledge to nail down the professional obligations and your professional know-how, there's not going to be a business. Right. If you don't have a business, again, then you can't have a practice.
It's hand in hand. One hand washing
Exactly.
the
So
other.
both have to be set up in a very, very meticulous way, and you have to maintain that, because as you bring on other staff and other team members, there will be attempts to dilute that.
Right. Okay.
Why can't we just do? Why can't we? We did it there before. Doesn't matter. You have to know what you're doing to consistently. And if they're good ideas, great, implement that. Right? Be flexible, but always maintain the standard in terms of your sophistication, your knowledge base, and the quality of the advice you're giving.
Right.
And also making sure you're getting paid appropriately for your risk.
Yeah,
right?
Because what I was going there with those things that you were touching on is almost marketing the value you're able to provide the client, and just like you said, increasing your knowledge, and if you implement these systems, making sure that the reflection is based on the value that you're gonna, it's gonna improve the value you're able to provide your client, which will essentially justify whatever price it is that you're offering, right? Routinely, I hear, sometimes at these functions that we go to, I'll hear conversations where lawyers will be asking, what are you charging for this these days? And, they'll throw out a number, and it'll be like, whoa, why are you only charging that? Oh, well, because this guy down the street is charging this, and then these guys are doing all-in pricing. And so, in order for us to compete, and a bunch of times it's been, whoa. You are doing a disservice really to the profession by nickel and diming yourself, right? Are those clients who are, I guess, that price sensitive, like, is there something that they're missing in the value that you're providing? Because to me, I've been using the same lawyer for God knows how long, and I'll be honest, like, he could put any number down there, and I'm just saying, tell me where to sign, dude, right? I know the value he provides me. So a difference of a couple $100 is not going to matter to me because I understand the value that he's providing. Is there something that folks who are that price sensitive, maybe they're not keying on or understanding?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You just said it yourself. You know, whatever your lawyer provides, you're kind of stuck with it.
Yeah.
But you being a part of this profession, or you know, kind of constantly being in touch with the profession, you understand what we do.
Right.
When's the last time you saw on TV an ad or anything on social media where, you know, whether there's an individual lawyer or a body of lawyers or an association of some sort advocating what lawyers do?
Right.
When's the last time you saw that?
Yeah, that's a
We
good
as a
point.
profession do
That's a
a
good
really,
point.
really terrible job of actually trying to get the public to understand what we do. And I don't know if it's a, you know, a prohibition from our, I have to look into it, whether it's something that we just simply cannot do in terms of, you know, aggressively marketing the value of the profession.
Right.
You see that with the real estate agents. You know, OREA does all these, at one point, all these ads about, oh, what's the benefit of hiring a real estate agent? I think we saw something about the CPAs at one point as well. But, you know, as a profession, we have to basically educate the public on what we do.
Right.
At this point in juncture, I don't believe they do know what we do.
I would
right?
agree. I would tend to agree.
Nobody knows what we do, and they see, if you don't know what it is, but you're told that you have to pay for it, what do you think it is? It's now a tax.
Yes. Yeah.
And we all know how we feel about taxes, right?
Yeah.
So that's the problem, right? There's no value proposition. It's hard as a single lawyer or even a handful of lawyers to try to keep trying to educate the public at large. It's impossible.
Right.
So that's one thing. That's one thing that, you know, it is also, it's hard because it's almost not even worth the time for you to spend on every client coming in trying to educate that specific client what you do, right? Because the margins are so thin.
Right.
So you have to strike that level of kind of, I don't know how you could do it specifically for an individual lawyer, but you have to strike that level of, like, you know, you have to somehow demonstrate your value, whether it's through your website, whether it's through your ads, whether it's through just like the 30-second thing that you just teach all of your staff when people ask, well, what is it that you guys are gonna do for me, right?
Right.
And what's the difference between you and the other firm?
Yes.
So these are all little things that you can do, right? And the market's turning, right? We keep talking about the idea of the business. Also think about, you know, how do you control your costs? Right?
Okay.
All the lawyers I talk to, they're always focused on billing. That's great. Yeah, the more you bill, great, you make more money. But what about your costs? Right? Like, I just talked to someone recently, a colleague of mine, he discovered that his firm spends like $100,000 a year on various subscriptions. And my question was, do you use any of those subscriptions? It's like, no. So is that really necessary?
Yeah.
$100,000 in real estate,
Yeah.
right? In terms of, you have to now set aside your margin to account for $100,000 of billable. That's hundreds
And
of
that's where
closings.
it's like, yeah, give me everything.
That's
to
hundreds
recoup.
of closings.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So would you rather do hundreds more closings or just simply
Just
get rid of
not.
these things?
Yeah.
Or, like, you know, I talked to another colleague recently, and they just discovered that they had, because everything's subscription based these days.
Sure.
Everything costs you X dollar amount of dollars every month now. There's no, the days of when you can just buy, like, for example, a piece of software and just rely on that piece of software until it literally cannot move forward anymore is gone.
Yeah.
Everything's subscription based. So they discovered they never canceled the users for a bunch of ex-employees for the longest time.
Yeah.
So every one of those users are taking off $20 US dollars per month, right? In the aggregate, that's like thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah.
Where you could have just not done those
not done that
difficult
initiative.
transactions where the guy's just complaining about seeing a little chip on their door or whatever. You could have just not done that transaction altogether.
Right.
And still made more money.
So like you said, in terms of not wanting to invest a lot of money and time in educating that client. If there are other resources, and like what you said, like, you know, if that firm has their own website, and maybe on that website it has an FAQ section, your website's actually really good too. Or I've seen folks do like their own blog on particular issues or questions that they get a lot, right? To at least say, hey, okay, you know, I can direct you to this resource, or whether it's a LSO a resource or a Law Pro resource or anything like that, to kind of figure out or dip their feet in and get some information on, you know, the value that you are trying to provide to them. Or again, I think that would be a great piece of, you know, what sets apart one firm versus another, or hey, consumer, you know, look for this type of value from this firm. This is what you should be looking for, as opposed to, you know, folks who don't focus on, you know, this particular area.
And I think everyone should be doing it. Everyone should know exactly what the other professional in this chain does. Right. We as lawyers know exactly what real estate agents do. I know exactly what the mortgage agent will do. Right. I know exactly what title insurance does. We are the end point. Right? We're the final stretch of the race. Yeah. So we get to see what everyone else does. But that's not necessarily the case for each one of those people. Sure. Right? The real estate agent may not know exactly what the mortgage agent does. Sure. And vice versa. Yeah. Right? And they may not know what a title insurance policy does. Right. They may not know what a real estate lawyer does. They just think, oh, it's closing. Yeah. Or your lawyer will go through that with you. Like, what is a closing? What is a closing? Right. It's getting everything and piecing it all together and bringing it to closure. Right. If any of those pieces are not there, we can't just go back and make it happen. Yeah. Right. So I think, you know, we got to do more. We got to put in more effort as a profession to really educate the other professionals,
the other keys in the chain there. Yeah,
exactly. All the other professionals on what we do and what you should be looking at. Just like, you know, everything else, we are providing a service. There is some sort of, you know, standardized expectations that come out of that service. So you should be evaluating everybody on the same kind of level, right? You got to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Right. So, and there's so many varieties of what people are doing. You mentioned that earlier, like, you know, someone's doing this, someone's doing that. Because there's no uniformity in what lawyers do, that also creates confusion. Sure. Everybody knows what a percentage of commission is. Yeah. Everybody knows what a commitment fee is. You got to pay that to get your money. Yeah. Right? Because there's so much difference going on in the legal world, it just causes so much confusion. Sure. And there's no uniformity in terms of comparisons even.
I think you've given us a lot here. And for those watching or listening, you can tell, like, this guy, you know, he knows his stuff. He's come up through the game. He's very forward thinking. And I utilize that big brain of his, okay, to help, just like what we did, inspire me on where I can take things as well. So, Lee, we really appreciate this. If you could just let everybody know kind of where to find you. And again, definitely if you're looking for a real estate lawyer in the area, commercial real estate, residential, land development, which I think is like so cool, definitely give him a shout. But yeah, just let everybody know where to find you.
Yeah, so it's Lee Cheng, Licheng. My email is li@georgestreetlaw.ca. Phone number 905-526-2127.
Awesome. Appreciate you, Lee. This was, again, episode 2 of the In Closing podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.